Thanks everybody for joining again today. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about one of the key components that you need to consider as you are deciding what ERP or CRM software you want to go with. So today we're going to be focused on the platform side of it, and I'll talk in more detail about why that's important and how it's oftentimes overlooked. So as Leah mentioned, I'm Eric Newell. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Stoneridge Software. I've been doing the ERP and CRM world for about 21 years. So I spent 13 years with Microsoft in a variety of different roles in support and consulting and training. And then for the last little over 8 years, leading Stoneridge Software and implementation partner in the Microsoft Dynamics space. And I'm also the author of a book that's going to be coming out here this spring called Mastering Microsoft Dynamics Implementation. So it talks all about how you would go about going everywhere from making the decision to buy the software to implementing it to going into hypercare and long-term support. So I'm sure we'll have more information about that as that gets closer to coming out. So as I mentioned today, the goal for the series overall is really to provide some ideas on what to look for in a solution and how to conduct a thorough evaluation. So I spent a little more time in last week's webinar, and if you haven't had a chance to see that, Leah can send you the link to that as well too, but talking about the process and the selection process and who to have involved in all those kind of key elements of it. So I won't rehash that today, but that's really the goal here, is to give you all those different nuggets and ideas and experience around how do you make the best decision. And remember, this is a huge decision that has a big impact on the overall success of your organization. So make sure that you're really taking it seriously. Again, I'll just going to reiterate a few things I said last time, but this is going to be the brains of your system strategy for many years. The implementation is going to be difficult, time-consuming, and expensive, so you want to do it right and you want to partner with the right group. There's going to be a ton of change happening throughout the process, and you need to approach the decision by setting those important parameters, and I'd argue there's 4 key parameters that you need to decide on and use as your decision-making framework. You got to involve a cross-section of your team, but really identify who the ultimate decision maker is going to be, and then you got to make sure that decision maker is a key part of the process. So I'm going to repeat this every time I do the webinar, just because I think it's important to make sure you understand the gravity of the decision and how important it is to get it right. So the 4 keys that I find most important to making the right decision on the right software for you are the fit. So that's what we talked about last time, and that is how well does the solution fit my requirements. So you got to start with, what are your requirements? What do you want out of a solution? Is it a good fit for your industry? And then you take a look at the software and say, oh, that's going to fit my needs and my industry really well. Today we're going to be talking about the platform. Next week we'll talk a little bit more about the implementer and what to look for on an implementer. And then finally we'll talk about cost, like how much should it cost, what's too much, what's too little, what are the costs, and how do you think about costs as it comes to making your decision ultimately. So with that, let's jump into today's main topic, is the platform. So when you think about the platform, now the platform is something the IT leadership team generally gives a lot of thought to. And if you're not in IT, you probably don't think about this a lot. But it can have a big impact on what you choose and how well that actually works in your environment. So I want to talk a little bit about that today. But I also want to talk about a few more things that might not seem apparent in the word platform, which is the supportability of the product and how your team is going to be able to support it. So not only internally but externally, if you want to be able to get support, what that's going to look like. So I consider that part of the platform because it generally goes along with it, but it's may not seem apparent from just the name platform. Well, let's talk about the biggest piece of the platform and what everybody probably thinks about today when they think about platform, and that's cloud versus on-premise. So should we buy an ERP or CRM software that's in the cloud? Should we buy one that's hosted on-premise? And I want to kind of look at it from a couple perspectives. So if you think about the world in 2011, so in the world in 2011, the cloud was brand new. There was hardly any software that was cloud hosted at that time. You maybe had the early days of Salesforce and NetSuite, but generally, cloud was new. It was not something you used for the majority of the interactions that you had with software. Mostly you were interacting with on-premise software. So it was novel. It wasn't something that had been very proven at that time. There were concerns and legitimate ones about security in the cloud, and was that going to be secure, and do I want to give my data over to Amazon to host, and is that going to be safe? And that hadn't really been proven at that time. At that point, most ERPs just didn't work in the cloud, and there was a concern from a lot of folks that it wasn't going to work in the cloud because of the amount of processing that you have to do to run MRP or things like that. And CRM systems were just kind of getting into the cloud, and again, it just hadn't been proven at that point. And then when you looked at hosting, the cost of the cloud was really expensive. So the cost of the cloud could be just about as much as buying on-premise software, or the cost of 1 year is almost as much as buying it on-premise. So the math didn't really work out terribly well there either. So that gave people a lot of hesitation about using the cloud if you think back to 2011. But now if you think about the world that we're in today in 2021, so the cloud is everywhere. So just about every app that you're running is in the cloud. I mean, you have access to nearly everything, and all of this, in almost all the data today is being hosted in the cloud. I can unlock my door from a cloud-hosted app. I can start my car from a cloud-hosted app. All of these types of things are just so prevalent today that people are a lot more used to it. You're just choosing to use the cloud services in every aspect of life. I mean, people don't store pictures on a hard drive anymore. I did that actually in the 2011, 2012 timeframe. I had all my pictures stored on a hard drive, and I actually had them all backed up, and I had 2 hard drives fail at the same time, and I lost all my pictures. Now I just put them in one drive, and they're out there, and can have them forever, and that's just a very common thing. Same thing with music and everything. All of it is being hosted in the cloud today. And another big thing has changed over the past probably 5 years in particular is that just incidents of hacking in the cloud are extremely low. And you have these companies like Google and Microsoft and Amazon who can hire the best of the best security experts to make sure that their cloud is going to be safe and secure. And so you don't hear a lot about hacks or breaches into any of those environments. They've done a very, very good job, I feel like, of being able to protect those environments. I think Bill Gates, in the later years of his time at Microsoft, made trustworthy computing his most important thing, because it certainly had a reputation of not being trustworthy in the early 2000s. Another thing that you're seeing is ransomware is happening. Ransomware data breaches, they're happening in a lot of cases to on-premise hosted software. The town I grew up in, Fergus Falls, Minnesota, I heard from my parents that their hospital had a ransomware incident, and now a lot of their information is tied up, or they're struggling to get it back. They don't have information on your medical history from a year ago because that data they don't have back yet. I mean, it's been really crippling to that organization. And of course, you've heard a lot about data breaches that have occurred over the past few years as well too. But a lot of those are happening for the most part in on-premise hosted software. And the thing that I talk to people about too is, do you have a security expert on staff? If you want to host something on premise, do you have one of the foremost security experts on your staff who can prevent all of these, these hacks and these issues? If the answer is no, you probably shouldn't host something on-premise, because there are a lot of people out there trying to attack you and steal your data, or charge you $5 million for in ransom to get your data back. It's a very dangerous place to be if you don't have the best of the best to try to prevent these people from getting in. So you can probably guess what I'm going to recommend based on this, but I really do think you should look at using cloud software in 2021. The security is there now. The ubiquity of connecting to all these other different services is there now. ERP and CRM systems have developed and gotten their rhythm of how to work in the cloud, which, that's taken years to be able to get there, but now they're generally there. So I feel like this is going to be the best long-term investment for you. And then the final thing is just that the apples to apples cost comparisons now have turned more into favor of hosting in the cloud. So if you really compute all the costs related to hosting in the cloud, if you look at it just from a sticker price, it may look like it's a little bit more, but you also have to think about all of the internal staff time you would have maintaining those servers, keeping SQL running, buying licenses, doing updates, and then the security side of it, and then all of the backups too. I mean, backups in the cloud are generally automatic and things that you can get back right away. In the on-premise software, you've got to have somebody managing that. You got to be taking data off-site. If you put all those costs together, at least in a lot of the latest numbers I've looked at, that cloud is less expensive over the life of the project as well too. So I certainly suggest cloud as you're thinking about it. And another thing I like to do is think what's the world going to be like in 2031? Are people going to be using on-premise software? Are people going to be using cloud software? They're going to be using cloud software. So you want to try to stay ahead of it as best you can. Now, with that in mind, I did want to ask a poll question. So Leah, if you want to put up the poll question, I'm curious from those of you who joined today, what percentage of you have running ERP systems in the cloud or on-premise today? All right, do we have a good number of responses, Leah?
Yep, I will close it now. Oops. And looks like we had about 40% that are cloud hosted, 10% by a third party, 40% hosted in-house, and 10% not quite sure.
Okay. No, I think that makes sense. That's actually pretty consistent with how I feel it is out there today. I think certainly more and more people are going to the cloud, but it's a journey and it takes some time as well too. So it'll be interesting to look at those numbers in 5 years. So next I want to talk about just the technology platform. And the technology platform, when I think about it, I kind of think of 3 groups of kind of common technology platforms. So you've got the Microsoft platform, which includes Windows, Office 365, Teams. All of those are kind of part of the Microsoft platform, which is what the majority of companies are running these days. And then but there are a lot of companies that are choosing kind of the Google Slack Salesforce platform, where you're using maybe an Android operating system, or maybe you're using an Apple or a Mac, iMac, something like that as your operating system. And then you're communicating via Slack, you're using some of Google's open office type contents. And then there's the smallest group, but there's certainly a determined group of open source folks. So you might be using Linux and a free version of Office, Dropbox, things like that. So I think about those technology platforms today, and as it relates to your CRM or ERP decision, you want to try to choose a solution that's going to fit well with the platform that you've chosen for your IT platform. So I told this story one time in one of our early days. We went in to visit a company that was running everything on open source, and we tried to suggest Microsoft Dynamics AX at the time for them, and not surprisingly, they were not interested in that solution. They opted to go with some open source solution. So just think about whatever you use internally and how nice it would be to have your ERP or CRM system fit in well with what you're using today. So that's a key component that I think everyone should be thinking about. And what are some of the reasons why you might want to stay on a similar technology platform? So first is it just is really well integrated. Uh, if you think about all of the Microsoft technologies, you have access to all of that data through Power BI, through Power Apps, through Flow. So that Microsoft Dataverse, which was previously called the Common Data Model, is this one-stop shop for you to be able to access information across all of those Microsoft platforms. So if you're thinking about integrating something where in your CRM system you want to click a button and have it dial a client directly, you want to be able to do that with an integrated solution, and you're going to be better off using a common platform than what you use today. The other piece is the single sign-on. So not having to remember multiple logins is a positive thing for your help desk, a positive thing from a security standpoint. Also, from a security standpoint, generally these applications in these different areas are going to follow a similar security model. So you will be able to set up security that you'll be able to apply more centrally. I know with Office 365 now, when you set up a user in Office 365, you can enable all the different services for them. You can enable them to have access to customer engagement or finance and operations or business central, and it's as easy as unclicking it to take their access away. So all of those things are a lot easier to manage if you're on a platform that that hosts a lot of different similar applications. And then the other big thing is, depending on the size of your IT team, but your IT team's knowledge is really important. You're not, I mean, if you stuck me in front and I had to help a customer with LibreOffice, I probably would not be very good at that. But being a Microsoft guy, you could throw a new Microsoft technology at me and I'd probably be able to find my way around it. And your IT team's the same way. They're used to certain technologies that they're comfortable with, that they know where to find resources on, where they have friends who they can reach out to, and they just inherently are going to be able to pick things up faster if it's a technology platform that they're familiar with. So keep this in mind as part of your decision. It's not the most important part of your decision overall, but it is going to save you time, money, and hassles if you pick a solution that fits with the technology platform that you have today. Next, I want to be thinking about the cost of future upgrades. And this is one of the biggest reasons why you want to consider a cloud solution as opposed to an on-premise solution. So if you think about on-premise today and you have to and the process of upgrading. So, I've seen many surveys, but a lot of them say that anywhere between 5 and 10 years is the typical lifespan of an ERP. At that point, you might be changing it out, or you might be going through another implementation or re-implementation to try to get to the latest version on it. At Microsoft, typically in the on-premise days, software would be updated every 1, 2, or 3 years, depending on the size of the product. And generally, you had to be on either the current product or the N-1 product, the previous version of the product. So generally, in order to be supported, you needed to upgrade every 4 to 6 years. Now, people probably upgraded, like I said, on a 5 to 10 year cycle, but still, that's a pretty expensive endeavor that you're going to have to go through every 5 to 10 years to just stay on the latest version of the software. And the upgrades themselves, so if you're doing a GP upgrade, those are pretty inexpensive. You're doing a finance and operations upgrade that with tons of customizations, that's an expensive endeavor. and similarly with other products as well too. So upgrades can cost anywhere from maybe a quarter to 3/4 of the cost of the initial implementation. So if you want to buy on-premise software today and you want to spend $5 million on the project, you're probably looking at spending another $2.5 million in 5 years to upgrade to the latest version of it. And if you're putting together your total cost of ownership over 5 or 10 years, you got to factor that into the equation, and that's where cloud ends up looking really good. The other thing is that a lot of times you need to do updates on the software to get the latest code, and most companies are not in a really good position to uptake the latest code, so it might be a service pack or a hot fix update or whatever, and that can affect other parts of your application. And a lot of customers I've worked with in the past have been hesitant about applying any patches to their system because of fear of what that was going to do to things that are working today. So what ends up happening then is if you're in that cycle where you don't want to do these little updates, you end up just getting further and further behind, and sometimes getting in places where you need to apply a security update and you're not in a good position to take that. So those are other challenges of being on-premise software. If you think about it from the cloud, you never have to upgrade in the cloud. So the cloud solutions are built with the concept of always adding new functionality and giving you the ability to turn on and off functionality. So you're never going to have to change that platform. So if you think about on the Dynamics side, of course, is what I'm more familiar with, but Business Central, customer engagement, finance, and operations, there is no vNext of those that Microsoft is coming out with. They are doing 2 big releases every year of new functionality on that same platform. So you don't have to think about 5 years from now going and upgrading the solution and spending $2.5 million to try to get on the latest version of it. And that's, again, one of the key value propositions of being in the cloud. You do have to learn how to put on a regular update. Whether it's twice a year, 8 times a year, you're generally going to have to be able to do these interim updates to your system. And in some cases, you're required to put these updates on. Otherwise, you run out of support pretty quickly. So you're going to have to build a muscle for being able to put updates on. Obviously, these updates are designed not to cause any problems in your existing system, but you want to make sure you do have a testing strategy to allow you to continually take those updates. So you should be taking updates at least twice a year if you're using cloud software. So you've got to have a testing process in place that allows you to do that. I think that's a good thing to do anyway. Talked a lot about this in the end of the book, but you should be doing regular updates to your ERP or CRM platform so you can continue to get value out of those solutions. You're not going to get all the value that you intended out of the ERP or CRM system on day one of go live. You got to continually iterate and continually improve that platform to really get the most value out of it. So regardless, I feel like you should be in a position of doing regular updates anyway, and then you just load on the ERP or CRM vendor updates at the time you're making your quarterly updates or biannual updates. So another key thing to be thinking about as you think about the platform, again, it all comes back to building out your total cost of ownership and taking a look at it. Obviously with cloud, you've got subscription-based pricing, so you're paying monthly for the number of users. On-premise, you're usually paying a lot up front and then paying anywhere from 10 to 25% year over year for maintenance on it. So you want to make sure that you're putting all those costs together and look at it out 5 years and factor in the cost of future upgrades as well. Then the other key point that I wanted to mention is just how supportable is the product. And it's interesting the situations I've run into over the years about how people are able, or how the lack of supportability of the product ends up causing you to do upgrades or to replace your ERP system in the future. So you don't want to paint yourself into that corner and get yourself in a position where the solution is not going to be very supportable in the future. So I think there's 5 questions that you need to ask as you're buying the software to understand what the long-term supportability of it is, who's going to provide the support? Is it you're going to get that through the implementation partner? Are you going to get that through the vendor? And what does their support team look like? Does the implementer have a dedicated support team, or are you going to be, emailing your implementation consultant and hoping they get back to you in a reasonable time frame? And then what does it look like from the vendor standpoint? The next question is, how long is this version going to be supported? So what is the long-term vision for the support for that particular version that you're going to be deploying? So if you're going to buy, version 9 of Epicor right now, and it's got a year left of support before it's no longer supported anymore, that's probably not something that you want to do. You'll get yourself in a bad position that way. How many partners or implementers are there who specialize in this product? So if I talked to a customer who was running on SysPro, and I asked them how they got support for SysPro today, and they said, well, I actually get support out of South Africa. I'm like, well, that's probably not what you want, since they were based in Wisconsin. Just from a time zone perspective, so you want to make sure that if it doesn't work out for whatever reason with the implementer that you're working with or the support team that you're working with, that there's other people that you can go to and feel reasonably good about how well they'll be able to support you. Another thing that's not really considered a lot, but how much information is available on the internet about this product? And you'll see this especially in some of the ag projects that we're looking at when we're looking at some of the competitive software in the ag space. I mean, you can't find any information on the internet. You have to pay to talk to support about anything that you have a question about. So you want to look at how much information is available on this product. Can you find it online? Can you find it on their website? Can you find stuff that people have posted on YouTube? If you are trying to support this product internally as much as you can, you got to have resources for your IT team to be able to get the help that they need. So this, to me, is a key part of the equation as well. And then as it relates to the technology platform, is how many internal staff are familiar with the product today? So do you have people who really know, Slack, and they've been doing Salesforce for 10 years? Well, then Salesforce is going to make more sense to you. So think about who do you have and how, and the internal staff thing makes a difference from just a cost standpoint. So any cost that you can take on or assign internal people to is going to save you money in the long run, but also they're going to support it well. They're going to be able to be familiar with it. They're going to be able to be encouraging about this solution as well too. So there's a lot of value in going with something that your internal staff have pretty good familiarity with. So as you think about the platform as well too, I think it's important to think about something called these ERP tiers. So when I talk about the tiers, it's really the size of your business. So if you're a Fortune 500, Fortune 1000, billion-dollar plus company, you're going to want to run on a tier 1 software for the most part. And so typically the ERP titans are SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations, and Infor. So those are the ones that are designed to work with companies that are $1 billion or more in revenue. So then you get to the tier 2 class, and there's about 30 different companies that have ERPs in the tier 2 class. So that'll be things like NetSuite, Epicor, IFS, Deltek, Sage. And those are all good solutions for anywhere up to $1 billion, or maybe it's only up to 100 million or $200 million in revenue. But those are mostly designed more for the mid-market. So if you are more in the mid-market, you should try to find a solution in that space. And from a Microsoft standpoint, that's more where Business Central fits in. Is it fits into that 0 to 250 million in revenue market is what its sweet spot is. And then you've got tier 3 solutions. So tier 3 solutions, excuse me, there's hundreds of different small or niche ERP software solutions out there. The last time I mentioned Dentrix as like a dental focused ERP software, that would be in the tier 3 component. So there's a ton of names in there. I do ERP and CRM for a living, and I recognize very few of the names that are actually in the tier 3. But if you're a law firm, there's probably a tier 3 solution that really fits well. The problem with a lot of the tier 3 solutions is they're not going to pass the platform test very well, because they probably are not highly extensible. They probably are not something your team is familiar with. They're probably not, probably in a position where you don't have a lot of support options for those. So if you're thinking about tier 3, it's got to be a really good fit, and you got to have a really good comfort level with who's going to be supporting it and who else you can get support from, and what upgrades look like. If you're really considering something in tier 3, you got to go through these bullets I talked about in the webinar in some great detail to make sure you're going to be okay. There's a good list out on Panorama Consulting. They have an ERP vendor database. So if you're looking to find any of the 300 different ERPs that are out there, definitely go check that out. On the CRM side, you kind of have two titans of the CRM space. You've got Salesforce and you got Dynamics 365 customer engagement. Those are the two most common solutions out in the world today. When you think about CRM, you think about sales, marketing, customer service, field service, those types of things. Then you have some solutions that are integrated with the ERP system. So like SAP has a CRM, Oracle CRM, NetSuite CRM. These are generally not rated as high as Salesforce and Dynamics 365 customer engagement, but they do have the added benefit of being in the same data structure as the ERP. So there is some advantage to those. But then there's tons of CRM software out there as well too. So some of the more popular stuff is going to be Zoho, Odoo, Act, HubSpot, Agile CRM, Sugar CRM. HubSpot's a great free solution if you're a tiny company and you need some marketing help. That's a great place to get started. So all those kind of depend on where you are in your life cycle, the size of your business, and but I thought it was important to think about, depending on the size of the company, you should really be thinking about what kind of ERP or CRM system is going to be a fit for your size and scale of company. So to wrap things up, I wanted to just kind of give a little update or give some thoughts on the impact of platform as it relates to the decision on what you're going to buy. So if you don't consider the platform, the biggest challenge I have for you is you're going to end up having to do this again very soon. So if you buy the best dental software for your solution today, it's on-premise software with 3 people supporting it, and 2 of them get sick. I mean, you could be in a position 3 years later that you're going to have to move off of that software because you can't get support for it. So that's the problem if you don't consider platform. There might be limited people who can support it, and the product won't be a seamless experience for users. My sister-in-law runs a chiropractic clinic, and so she runs some of this kind of tier 3 specific software for some of the applications, and it's just a challenge to keep track of all the usernames and passwords of all the different systems they use. They don't talk to each other at all. They have very limited support for some of the software as well too, and in some cases you might be in an industry where that's just the reality that you have to face, but that impact of platform can really hinder what you're able to do with your solution. Now, it is very common that you only consider platform when making a decision. In fact, that's probably the least common way of approaching a solution, unless you happen to be a CIO. But if you only consider platform, the challenges that you're going to face is you're going to ignore the other key factors. You might not find the solution with a very good fit for your industry and your business. You might find a solution that doesn't have the right implementer or is too expensive because you decided to go all out. I mean, if you're a $50 million business and you say, I want to be on SAP, well, that's great from a platform standpoint, but the cost is going to be, way too high for what you can, reasonably implement at your organization. So you got to make sure that you take all of these four factors in balance as you think about your decision.